we should not be fighting for segregation. We should be fighting for equality. That is where we should be focusing our minds, not on the wife I have chosen, who means you no harm, whose only apparent crime has been to fall in love with me, and mine to fall in love with her.
So this is a phenomenal story, but I think the irony about it is that it seems like none of us actually knew that this story existed. Why is it that we know a lot of the horrific stories, but we don't know about the stories of overcoming those horrors?
Well, I have a very clear opinion about that. I think particularly when it comes to film, it's to do with who gets to tell the stories. You know, so often African stories are told from without, from people who are not from Africa necessarily, and so therefore their own prejudices, if you like, but certainly their own opinion of the place dictate the kind of stories they gravitate towards. As a person of African descent myself, this is the kind of story I want to see out of Africa because it's evocative of what I know to be true. I think that, you know, this film in hands other than Amma Asante's will be a very different story as well. I think for her, being a person, again, of African descent, is why, you know, she and I gravitated towards this and wanted to see this coming to fruition.
David sort of always talked about growing up in England and, you know, watching a lot of period drama and sort of loving it, but then realizing there was never anyone who looked like him in any of it. And I was very struck by that, and I remember when we were filming outside in Whitehall, and you said, you know, I've sort of dreamt of this all my life, and here I am in a trilby and a trench coat doing a... that was very exciting to me, to be part of that, you know. Of course, Amma has made another period story, Belle, which involves people who are not white. But I think you also meant, were you sort of suggesting that, you know, maybe this story has been kept under wraps by the British government? We know about sort of empire and the stories of empire, but we don't know so much the stories of the little people who overcome those bigots.
I don't think it's necessarily just the British Empire, though, because like Loving, that came out last year, it's a very similar story set in America, where it is as well as about two people who simply love each other. They're not politically motivated. It comes from a very natural and human desire to just be together, which to me seems like a far better way to kind of share this sort of message than to just kind of hammer home the horrors of it.
Yes, I think if Ruth had been someone who'd been politicized before she met Seretse, I might not have found the character quite as interesting. I think it was the fact that she understood the issues through a sort of gut punch when, you know, she falls in love with a man of a different colour skin to her and suddenly is living the experience of racism and prejudice. And I found that very compelling, the fact that she's forced to become a stateswoman and a sort of advocate for this.
And with these kind of stories, and, you know, Loving being one as well, you know, and a United Kingdom, they show the government behaving very badly, and so therefore, you know, of course, that's not going to be readily taught in schools. It's not going to be in history books in the way that it maybe should be, and so, you know, that's the power of film. That's the power of what artists, I think, can bring to a cultural conversation.
One of the things I loved about reading through the press notes is that Amma wanted to capture your characters as vulnerable. Rather than just seeing them as these very strong individuals, she wanted to show that they did have weakness and that did struggle.
Well, even though we've talked about some of the political elements of the film, at the end of the day, it is a love story. And in order to portray that, in order to be truthful to that, vulnerability and human frailty is absolutely synonymous with falling in love, and that's what I think a general audience is going to be able to relate to, as opposed to, you know, the fortitude these two people had against politics. So, you know, Amma, that for me is why she had to be the one to direct this. I remember very early on her saying to me that any politics within the film should only be there if it drives the love story forward. And I think that is key to this story, and the fact that this story can be one that a bigger, broader audience can embrace.
So even in the corridors of power, when Clement Attlee is discussing the marriage, he's talking about, if I let, this white woman share a bed with this black man, I'm going to bring down. So even when it's the politicians talking among themselves, they are discussing them in bed together. They are discussing, so that's one of the things that Amma said as well, wasn't it?
Yes.
She was always going to have the politics as it related to them specifically.